What I do say is that no man is good enough to govern another man without that other's consent. I say this is the leading principle, the sheet anchor of American republicanism. The master not only governs the slave without his consent, but he governs him by a set of rules altogether different from those which he prescribes for himself. Allow all the governed an equal voice in the government, and that only is self-government. Slavery is founded in the selfishness of man's nature. Opposition to it is in his love of justice. Finally, I insist that if there is anything which it is the duty of the whole people to never entrust to any hands but their own, that thing is the preservation and perpetuity of their own liberties and institutions.
Citizens of the United States, your suffrages having elected me to the office of President of the United States, I have, in conformity to the Constitution of our country, taken the oath of office prescribed therein. I have taken this oath without mental reservation and with the determination to do to the best of my ability all that is required of me. The responsibilities of the position I feel, but accept them without fear. The office has come to me unsought. I commence its duties untrammeled. I bring to it a conscious desire and determination to fill it to the best of my ability to the satisfaction of the people. On all leading questions agitating the public mind, I will always express my views to Congress and urge them according to my judgment, and when I think it advisable, will exercise the constitutional privilege of interposing a veto to defeat measures which I oppose. But all laws will be faithfully executed, whether they meet my approval or not.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer. It's the answer told by lines that stretched around schools and churches in numbers this nation has never seen. By people who waited 3 hours and 4 hours, many for the first time in their lives, because they believed that this time must be different, that their voices could be that difference. It's the answer spoken by young and old, rich and poor, Democrat and Republican, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, gay, straight, disabled and not disabled, Americans who sent a message to the world that we have never been just a collection of individuals or a collection of red states and blue states. We are and always will be the United States of America.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today to the Peoria Riverfront Museum and our giant screen theater. My name is Renee Kerrigan. I'm the Vice President of Programs here at the museum, and I'm so happy to have you all here today. Thank you for coming. This is our first lecture in our Illinois lecture series. We're so pleased to have our distinguished guests here today to speak about the 4 presidents associated with Illinois. And I just wanted to mention a few things before we get started, that we do have a whole series of lectures to go along with our current exhibition, 200 Years, Celebrate Illinois, 200 Years in the Land of Lincoln. The exhibit just opened a few weeks ago, and if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, I highly encourage you to go see it. It's I think, a fantastic exhibit with over 240 objects from Illinois' history, celebrating our state, from agriculture to science to politics, pop culture, art, all sorts of areas of Illinois history are celebrated in this exhibit with collections from all over the state. We have lectures and other programming related to the exhibit all on the museum's website that you can check out if you're interested. Coming up in March, we'll have a lecture about women and science by Dr. Martha Vaughn of the Peoria's Ag Lab. We'll have a talk about Illinois and the Underground Railroad in April. Illinois and the Civil War in May by Bernie Drake. And then a talk about astronomy in Illinois in May, from Hubble to Pluto. So check out all that information on our website if you're interested. And finally, I'd just like to say thank you to all our museum members and Visionary Society members who are here today. Museum members are the reason we are still existing. The way we function is with your support, so thank you so much for your support and coming out today. And I'd just like to turn it over to our President and CEO, John Morris.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Renee Kerrigan, our Vice President for Programs and Planetarium Director. How many have ever seen Renee give a planetarium show? She does a marvelous job. On behalf of our team here at the Peoria Riverfront Museum and our Board of Trustees, my bosses, I want to say welcome to the Peoria Riverfront Museum today, a private museum. Thanks to your support, we do all kinds of great things. It's a private museum living in a public house. We have with us today Sally Snyder, one of our board members, and we thank you, Sally, for being here and your leadership, and all of those who support this museum. What a privilege it is to celebrate Illinois together. This is a remarkable state, and our team set out to put together an exhibition in this, the bicentennial year of the state of Illinois, that would possibly open eyes in a different way. To our knowledge, this is the first comprehensive exhibition of its kind, celebrating the achievements of Illinois. How many of you have actually had time to go through and seen the exhibition so far? Good, good. Most of you, please take a chance to go see it. But this program I'm particularly excited about because it features 4 people who are, I will say, my personal friends, who I've known for a long time, and who I think are going to give us a tremendous perspective on the leadership that has come out of our state. How about those clips when we reflect on those? I personally have never seen back-to-back the 4 Illinois presidents reflected in that way. What'd you think? Well, we have with us today 4 speakers who range from having lived history in Secretary Ray LaHood, our former U.S. Congressman from the 18th District of Illinois, a native of Peoria, a prominent person not only locally for 2 generations now, that he has served in different capacities, a former school teacher, some of you may know that, an educator by heart, a great leader for this community who's cared deeply about the communities of Central Illinois, but also on the national stage, who served as the United States Secretary of Transportation in the first term and a little bit of the second term of President Barack Obama. We have, and who I will say is one of the leading spokesmen for bipartisanship, probably in the United States, author of a book, Seeking Bipartisanship. And so we have Ray LaHood with us. We have Dr. Jamel Wright with us, the president of Eureka College. Smallest college to ever graduate a president of the United States, the only president born and raised in Illinois. Ronald Wilson Reagan, class of 1932. Jamel herself, a native of the Midwest, from St. Louis. A long-standing career as a nationally respected expert in communications, her doctorate from the University of Kansas in communications. She has served at St. Louis University immediately prior to coming to Eureka, where she was the vice president and interim president, and recently inaugurated as the new president of Eureka College. We're so thrilled to have Dr. Wright with us tonight. And Ian Hunt, I have to tell you about Ian Hunt. Ian is representing Ulysses S. Grant today, but he didn't grow a beard for the occasion. But Ian has been a long-standing professional representing the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. He's head of acquisitions for the library. And I first got to know Ian probably 10 years ago, where he took me in the vault at the Presidential Library and let me have a look at the stovepipe hat of Abraham Lincoln. So I have to just reflect and show my public gratitude. But thank you for coming up with your colleague today to represent your expertise on Ulysses S. Grant. We're pleased to have you as a friend, and we'll be hearing more about what the library is doing. And finally, we have with us one of the nation's leading experts on Abraham Lincoln, Dr. James Cornelius, the curator of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. Dr. Cornelius and I have known each other for a long while. He ties the best bow tie in Illinois, probably since Senator Simon.
Not even close.
Yes. Dr. Cornelius, we are very fortunate to have him here in his leadership, and my new friend Ellen, my friend and new director of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library, Ellen Lowe, who was here with us last Friday to open this exhibition. We are very pleased that the Peoria Riverfront Museum and the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library have a growing friendship. And I appreciate all of our panelists, Secretary LaHood, Dr. Wright, Ian Hunt, Dr. James Cornelius. Please help me welcome them all as we get started today. Each is going to make a presentation and then begin to think of your questions and comments. But we're going to start with the most recent Illinois Connected President, Barack Obama. Here to give us his reflections, somebody who is at the front row, Secretary Ray LaHood.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I think those of you that know about this magnificent Peoria Riverfront Museum and how it came about probably feel like I do, that we're so fortunate to have someone like John leading the museum and really thinking outside of the box about what a museum can do and what an attraction it can be and what kinds of exhibits are going to attract people from all over central Illinois and all over Illinois. And I think the exhibit on Illinois is just extraordinary. I know some of you have seen it. For those of you who haven't, please take advantage to do it. In really getting to the nub of what John is after here, and I thank all of you for coming and your interest in the presidents that we're going to be talking about here. I reflect on the idea that when you look at the campaign that then Senator Obama ran against Senator McCain, it obviously is a striking difference, not only a generational difference, but a difference in what each person would do if they were to be elected. And I think about the early days of President Obama's administration facing some real stiff headwinds on the economy. As many of you will remember, the economy was pretty bad, very high unemployment, and a lot of people looking for work, and the economy really suffering a great deal. President Obama, after he was elected, inherited the kind of banking and financial institution mess that had been left to him, and trying to deal with that. So obviously the economy was certainly a big part of that campaign. I think many of you remember also that then Senator Obama said that if he were elected president, he would get us out of these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so that became certainly a mission. And then thirdly, I think the other issue that was certainly prominent throughout the campaign was the issue of health care and what to do about millions of people in our country who, through no fault of their own, or because they didn't work for a company who didn't provide health insurance, or didn't have the means to take care of their own health insurance. And so I think those three issues during the time that President Obama came into office, trying to deal with the economy, trying to figure out what to do with the economy, trying to put together some regulatory reforms around the issue of financial institutions and bringing financial stability to the economy, and then really tapping then Robert Gates, who was serving in President Bush's administration as his own Secretary of Defense, thinking that Gates could really bring that experience, having been so closely aligned with President Bush and both wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then originally tapping former Senator Tom Daschle to be the head of Health and Human Services to help lead the opportunity for what has been commonly referred to as Obamacare. Within the first 30 days of the administration of President Obama being sworn in, the Congress passed an $870 billion economic stimulus bill. And for those of us that were at the Department of Transportation, that was a bonanza because $48 billion of that came directly to DOT, and we were sort of off to the races in trying to put a lot of people to work in transportation. The advantage, I think, during that period, which is so critical to a president, is President Obama had a majority in the House and Senate. A majority of Democrats in the House, majority of Democrats in the Senate. That enabled him to really move pretty quickly on his economic agenda. Obviously, it took much longer on his healthcare agenda and also on the military agenda, and trying to figure out what to do not only in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also in the Middle East. But having the ability to put your agenda out there and get the Congress to pass it rather quickly was a real advantage. And I think the fact that President Obama had served in the Senate, even for only 2 years, he had a lot of friends in the Senate. And having been elected the way that he was, with such a large plurality, he had a mandate from the people and felt that he really needed to carry that out. One of the first responsibilities right after his election was to put together a cabinet, and I had, from my own personal view, had already announced sometime way back 18 months previously that I was not going to run for re-election to the U.S. House after serving 14 years, and I think people wondered why I was doing that, but as I said, during that time it was kind of like Groundhog Day. I had been to a lot of parades, a lot of county fairs, a lot of Lincoln Day dinners, and I didn't know if there was really anything more I could really offer in terms of the service to the people of the 18th District and to Illinois, and was really thinking about doing something else, and had no idea I was going to become a part of President Obama's administration. And the two people that really made that happen, one was Rahm Emanuel, who President Obama named as his chief of staff immediately after his election. A friend of mine from Chicago, he and I both served from the Illinois delegation. And then, of course, President Obama and I worked together when he was a U.S. Senator and I was a congressman. I could tell a couple stories about that, maybe I will, but why don't I leave it at that, John? And I think if there's any takeaway about President Obama's administration. I think it's the idea that he said certain things during the campaign, and he felt obliged to carry those out, and he had the votes in the Congress to get it done. And what an advantage. And then I think the third is he surrounded himself with good people. His chief of staff knew Washington, knew the Congress. Rahm Emanuel turned out to be a great chief of staff for 2 years. Picking Hillary Clinton, his mortal rival in the primary as his Secretary of State, real genius, not dissimilar to what Lincoln did. If you read the book Team of Rivals, you know that Lincoln picked those who had run against him for president to be in his cabinet. And then, you know, the idea that he wanted a bipartisan cabinet and reaching down to what he considered to be a friend in Ray LaHood and offering me an extraordinary opportunity to serve in his administration. I think those were the capstones, really, that led to the success that he had, certainly legislatively.
Excellent. Let me say about everybody here is representing either themselves or the institution they represent, is a lender to the exhibition, Celebrate Illinois. Secretary LaHood has lent 3 objects that are on display in the galleries right now. One of those is a pen in which President Obama used to sign his first executive order. One is a photograph of the entire cabinet, which Ray LaHood was a member, signed by every cabinet member. And one is really a classic photograph from his own personal collection, the day that our own friend and local Congressman Ray LaHood was announced to be nominated Secretary of Transportation. So we appreciate your loans. Some of my own enthusiasm, if you know where I came from before I arrived at the Peoria Riverfront Museum. I spent 10 years as the founding director of the Ronald W. Reagan Society of Eureka College. So our next speaker is not only a personal friend, but also near and dear to my heart in leading the institution that is the alma mater of the 40th President of the United States, the Illinois-born Ronald Wilson Reagan, and also a generous lender. Her colleague and my friend, Vice President Mike Bertoff from the colleges who are here with us today, they arranged to lend us the diploma of Ronald Reagan, the only Golden Globe Award Ronald Reagan received, the class photograph of his freshman year, an all-school photograph, the yearbook of Ronald Reagan. If you haven't seen it, go see it in the exhibition. But please help me welcome the president of Eureka College, Dr. Jamel Wright.
So I would echo Secretary LaHood's comments and compliments first of John and Renee and all the Peoria Museum staff. And I've told Secretary LaHood earlier, as we were talking about John transitioning from Eureka College to the museum, that this is the only other place that's perfect for John besides being the director of the Reagan Society. This is the only other place he could have come. And he is doing a phenomenal job. I'm so proud of him. I have to always remind him to follow his own advice. So he gives the most wonderful advice of all to presidents and other senior leaders as he continues to give us at Eureka College. And I'm always saying, John, do what you told me to do. So great job, John. Thank you, Renee, wherever you may be in the room, and to all the rest of the museum staff for the invitation and for having this event. Again, similar to what Secretary LaHood said, I think it is great to finally have an event where we're celebrating Illinois and talking about some of the amazing accomplishments of those like Ronald Reagan, who actually was born and raised in the state of Illinois, versus any type of negative stories and those things associated with the state of Illinois. And Lord knows the state could really use some competitive advantages right now. And so what a great time to talk about some of the celebratory occasions and for the state of Illinois. So Ronald Wilson Reagan, I'm very honored to serve as the 27th president of Eureka College. And I guess kind of dovetailing from what Secretary LaHood said, what President Reagan was able to do so well was definitely surround himself with good people. And that'll be part of where I end my story. I know you all don't need a history lesson about Ronald Reagan because you all know all sorts of things. I was just sharing that my daughter, who's in the Washington School District, is in the 5th grade, and they had to pick a president. It's, they're focusing on President's Week as we approach President's Day, and she, of course, picked Ronald Reagan, of course. So, and she brought home this animated book that I think the name of it is "Who is Ronald Reagan?" And so I found myself thumbing through the book and thinking, "Is that a true story? I don't know if is that accurate?" But but I'm sure some of it has to do with the desire to engage young people. But so I won't go into the "Who is Ronald Reagan" part as the book that my daughter has. But I do think there are a few key things that will help to make a couple of points that I'd like to make. And of course, I have to talk about Reagan at Eureka College because he even said that everything good in his life began at Eureka College. So we can't have a conversation about President Reagan without talking about his very humble and modest beginnings, not at Eureka College, but to start with, and being born in Tampico and then raised in Dixon from the age of 9, where he came from a very modest family. And after graduating high school, having been involved in a number of things, one thing I will say is that if you look at the history and Reagan's history, he was always a very well-rounded person. And that becomes very important as he transitions over the many careers that he had very successfully. So he gets to Eureka College in 1928. He's double majoring. He's in multiple sports. He's part of many theater performances and plays. He serves as part of the Student Senate, ultimately being president of the student body in his last year. He starts his freshman year, and in the second semester, he gives his first speech. Now, how many of you all have been to Eureka College? You may have been through the exhibition. Okay, so you have to visit. So this is easy. It's not a bucket list thing because it's right up the road. So it's pretty close. And so please visit. We have a wonderful museum there, but we also have the chapel there, McAllister Hall, where Ronald Dutch Reagan gave his first speech. At the time, he was rallying the students. They were all in a fuss because of cuts and those kinds of things that were happening across the campus. Students wanted to strike, and they picked him. And he says that was the first time that he realized that his words could be so influential. So it was in that moment that he realized that he started to really recognize those talents that he had. And again, remember, he ultimately becomes known as the great communicator. So again, his pathway, definitely, you talk about being called. He followed his calling very well. So he gave his first speech and that semester and rallied the students, became a very influential voice on campus. Eureka College can absolutely be one of the most significant experiences for Dutch because he did find his voice there. And he did have a very transformational experience while at Eureka College, having done all of these things, being so well-rounded, once again, at the college level. So he leaves, and I would like to say that in some ways, he actually was a little before his time, given the number of careers that he transitioned to. He had about 5 distinct careers over the course of his time, the 5th of which led him to the Oval Office, being President of the United States, but he was in about 50 films, which one got him the Golden Globe Award, of course. He was a radio announcer, had been, of course, the president of the Screen Actors Guild, and then a 2-term governor for the state of California, and also then in 1981 is inaugurated for 2 terms as president of the United States. And during that time, of course, some of the focal points, interesting of a lot of the overlap for these presidents, but of course the economy was a big one for him. There was communism, of which he was vehemently opposed. So you saw a lot of his accomplishments, which there are a litany of them while he was in office. And you saw the clip earlier of him talking to Mikhail Gorbachev, of whom they ended up having a pretty interesting relationship, I would say, given the connection and the politics of the time, and him saying to tear down this wall. A couple of things that I would say in terms of takeaways, and I'm going to round out. I'm really eager to hear you all's questions and the rest of the conversation, because I would actually argue that of all of the accomplishments of President Ronald Wilson Reagan during his 8 years in office, one of his biggest accomplishments is his ability to communicate well, was his ability to surround himself with good people, was the fact that he was known as a bridge builder and a uniter. And you had a Tip O'Neill then for President Reagan, who he had to make sure that there was some collaborative and bipartisan efforts that were made to really affect change. You had him saying that we could do great things if we don't care who gets the credit. That was who he was as a person. That was his philosophy. And as we think about where we are today, and I would like to say some of the challenges that not only the state of Illinois faces, but more broadly as a country, it's interesting hearing how often President Reagan is referenced and compared. He's used as a standard bearer for comparison in many ways across many contexts these days. And some of the most significant things were those abilities to really communicate with others and have that bipartisan approach and really have that sense of character and integrity and humor. He was quite funny, apparently, throughout over the course of his life, and played practical jokes on people here and there. But all of those things became really important, and I think those are the things that we could really probably draw some good examples and educational pieces from today as we move forward, even beyond some of the things that led to the history-making decisions that he made, including appointing the first female to the Supreme Court in Sandra Day O'Connor. So Reagan took risks. He was the great communicator. He was all about technology in terms of his use of television at the time. He absolutely believed in reaching across the aisle in order to get things done. And again, those are things that I would say are some of the things that we should really focus on today and take away from President Reagan and his time in office. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. No finer representative, I think, of the smallest college to ever graduate the President of the United States than Dr. Jamel Wright. Isn't she great? Our next speaker has an extraordinary task, and that is that of the 4 presidents connected to the state of Illinois, the one certainly with the least, definitely, he says, with the least connection to our state, and yet an important connection. How many people have ever been to Grant's home in Galena, Illinois? Okay, so he certainly has a connection to our state. We'll talk about Galena, and we'll talk about Grant, but Grant's relationship to Abraham Lincoln is why Ian is here representing the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library to talk about Grant, and I think a fascinating look at Grant, not only Grant's connection to Illinois, but Grant as a leader. And we have a first edition Ulysses S. Grant autobiography. Those of you who know political biography know it's one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of autobiography, on display in our exhibition right now. And so, here to talk about Ulysses S. Grant, one of the Ohio-born presidents, but certainly somebody connected to Illinois, is our friend Ian Hunt. Thanks, Ian.
As my fellow panelists have already said, I always welcome coming to Peoria. I always welcome coming to this institution. It is a beautiful facility physically, and the collections here are marvelous. Take it from me, I collect at the Abraham Lincoln. So I have a pretty good idea of what makes a good collection and what doesn't. I will say that John and I have been friends for a number of years, and his favorite story to tell is always the story of going into the vault to see the hat. And invariably, whoever is standing around there kind of looks at me and goes, why haven't I gotten to go to the vault? So I need to ask John in the future maybe not to tell that story quite as much, because invariably I get angry phone calls and emails asking why they haven't gotten that option.
It just occurred to me in a dream. I didn't actually do it, but I was in the vault with the stovepipe.
So when I was asked to come up here today to speak about President Grant, most of the time when I'm studying him, I'm focusing on his military life. I try to think about what is it that really connects this man to Illinois. And as we've already kind of made light of the situation, he is certainly has the least amount of time physically within the state. But at the exact same time, he has a unique opportunity while he is here. The reason that Mr. Grant comes here is, unfortunately, there is a financial panic in 1857. After resigning from the United States Army following service on the western frontier and during the Mexican conflict, Mr. Grant had gone back to the St. Louis region to try his hand at farming, to try his hand at real estate, a number of different business ventures. And unfortunately, all of those failed miserably. In 1857, during the financial crisis, Mr. Grant was at such a low point that he was forced to pawn his gold watch and watch chain so that he could purchase Christmas presents for his family. The pawn ticket is one of the pieces that we have in our collection. It's one of the treasured pieces that we have. And it tells an aspect of a president that you don't normally think of. You don't normally think of them on their lowest points. You know, we tend to think of them as the grand figures in Washington giving grand speeches. Now, having said that, if the phrase meteoric rise could be applied to any individual, it has to be Ulysses S. Grant. As you can see from the image behind me, this is an image of the pawn ticket. In less than 10 years, General Grant would be the second man in history to be named Lieutenant General of the Armies, behind only George Washington, and he would be on his way to the White House. So in one decade, he goes from being so destitute he has to sell his watch to literally knocking on the door at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I won't talk in great detail about his military exploits because, of course, those have been written about extensively. General Grant rises through the ranks because he has a special determination. He has a unique ability when he's in the field. He does not believe that he should ever give his enemy an opportunity to breathe. He constantly keeps up pressure on his opponents, which is part of the reason why he is so incredibly successful as a general. Prior to him, generals like McClellan and Burnside, they would make attacks and then they would fall back so that they could rest and regroup. And surprise, surprise, the enemy also rests and regroups at that exact same time. So whatever losses you suffer in those attacks simply are negated. But General Grant keeps up this constant pressure. When President Lincoln is assassinated in 1865, future President Grant, I should say, is certainly the most popular man in America. The White House is almost thrust upon him. He writes in a private letter to his old friend William Tecumseh Sherman that he had not really considered becoming president prior to all of this, but that he was fearful that glad-handing politicians would try to trade patronage for support, and that he was going to lose all of the gains that had been made during the horrible conflict that had preceded the previous 4 years. So Grant goes to the White House very much as a reluctant occupant, I would say. He does not travel the country giving speeches during his campaign. In fact, he goes back to Galena and he stays at the DeSoto House Hotel, which is still standing today. You can go to the DeSoto House. And he essentially runs his campaign from there. And he even writes in a letter to one of his fellow congressmen, I shouldn't say fellow congressman, he wasn't in Congress, but to Congressman Elihu Washburn, that the campaign is just kind of going along. Nobody really even knows that they're campaigning. He's just treating it as a holiday while the rest of the country is rallying behind him. The thing that was probably the greatest asset for Mr. Grant during his time during the war, that really focuses Illinois for him, is that he has two unique opportunities going on. He is leading Illinois men for most of the war. He is surrounding himself with the men who would later be voting for him. So he's finding out what their concerns, what their questions, what their loves, what their hates were. And at the same time, he's also meeting a number of incredible politicians who stem from the state of Illinois, or who hail from the state of Illinois. One of those is, of course, President Abraham Lincoln, but another would be Congressman Elihu Washburn, who was a great champion of Mr. Grant's. Washburn was so close to Grant that when Grant won the presidency in '68, he actually named Washburn as Secretary of State for a short period of time, simply so Washburn could have that honor that he had been Secretary of State for the country. Most people today, when they think of Grant, they think of scandals. Now, unfortunately, his administration, both terms, were rocked by a series of scandals. But it's been pretty definitively proven by historians that Mr. Grant himself did not benefit from any of the shenanigans going on during his office. He, unlike Mr. Obama and Mr. Reagan, did not surround himself with great people. He surrounded himself with people that were loyal to him, and they unfortunately took advantage of the situation. So frequently when we talk about Mr. Grant's administration, we just talk about the scandals. But the reality is, General Grant did a huge service as president. In 1870, he created the Justice Department, and he immediately put that Justice Department to work, ensuring that the rights of the newly freed slaves in the South would be abided by, ensuring that Native Americans in the West would not be unfairly prosecuted or harassed. He was really, in my mind, trying to continue the work that Abraham Lincoln had started. He wanted to give people everywhere an equal opportunity, a chance to thrive in this nation. And I think that's all that most of us want, is just that opportunity to succeed. Following his administration, following his 8 years in Washington, of course, he goes on the grand tour of the nation. Following that, he falls on hard times. He has a son-in-law who, unfortunately, is a bit of a shyster, loses most of his investments, most of the money that he had amassed during his time there. He is diagnosed with throat cancer. He has a very good friend, a writer, maybe a few of you have heard of him, Mark Twain. Mark Twain had been encouraging General Grant, President Grant, to write about his experiences during the war. He had done a series of articles for Century Magazine. And Twain said, you know, we could really tie that up. The country needs to know about who you are and what you've lived, which is what, of course, leads to Grant's Memoirs, which most literature experts will tell you is probably the greatest book written in the 19th century, and it is certainly one of the greatest political memoirs ever written in our nation's history. Grant is struggling to get this book written as quickly as possible because he knows he's dying, and he knows that he does not wish to leave his family destitute and penniless. And literally, he finishes it just days before he will pass away from throat cancer. But he ensures, by writing that book, that not only would his story be told, but he ensures that his family would be well received for the remainder of their lives. So, while we tend to look at the bad on Grant, I'm here to defend the man. He was certainly a great American, he was a great military leader, and I would say he was definitely a great president.
Thank you so much, Ian. Well, our final speaker today will speak about Abraham Lincoln. And this bicentennial year, and our exhibition is entitled Celebrate Illinois 200 Years in the Land of Lincoln. We are the land of Lincoln, and this was the man who saved the Union, and who many regard as certainly the greatest president, if not next to George Washington. Here with us, one of the top scholars on Abraham Lincoln, who's spoken all over the world and certainly all over the country, and we're pleased to have him as our neighbor in Springfield, Dr. James Cornelius. James.
Thank you, John. Thank all of you. I think that the images I'll show you benefit from two things. They're a little bit different from what you've been seeing so far. First of all, because Mr. Lincoln is the most studied person in American history, the most written about person in the English language after Jesus, and the collecting of his writings and possessions is therefore so developed, we've got a lot more knowledge about small things concerning his life. And since our topic today is about our great Illinoisans, that's essentially what I've chosen to do here. The possibility, maybe the likelihood in the future that we will have such great collections that are still in private hands. Maybe some of you have private collections concerning Presidents Reagan or Obama, will come to public attention and be viewable, and we'll get constantly this bigger picture that we all need of our leaders. But just to go back, the first thing that Abraham Lincoln did when he entered the state of Illinois, nobody thinks about this. There is no image for it. His family was coming in the year 1830. He had just turned 21. He was the young, strong man, more or less the muscle behind the 14-person party who was crossing the Wabash River in 2 or 3 wagons. And they were in the icy floodplain of the Wabash River, just on the Illinois side, when their little mutt dog fell off the wagon. And people didn't notice this quite for a minute till somebody did, and there was the poor little thing floundering in the icy March waters. Abraham jumped off the wagon and went back, wading something like knee-deep, waist-deep water to rescue the dog. And people were saying, oh, hey, let the little mutt go. The first thing this man did in Illinois was help a helpless little creature. If this were a movie, you'd foreshadow his later career helping as many other people, helpless people, legally as he could. But our first image then takes us to a somewhat more material part of his life. The cabin that he helped his father and other family members build near Decatur was from mostly the hickory wood of the region. When Mr. Lincoln was killed 35 years later, a couple of his enterprising cousins, and what is history but enterprise? And Mr. Lincoln himself certainly understood and appreciated entrepreneurs. They took apart the cabin, put it on a train, and took it to Boston Common for the summer, and rebuilt it there, and sold bits of it. And this is one of those bits. It's about 14 inches long. For 25 cents, you could buy a piece of the cabin, the hickory wood that Abraham Lincoln had built with his hands, with his family, upon arriving to settle in Illinois. This is how much Americans wanted to possess some relic of that man. Boston, why Boston, you might ask? Well, it was the major city that had not been able to receive Lincoln's funeral train in 1865 as it passed from Washington to Springfield. So it's also, by the way, the place where the American Revolution more or less began. You tie those people together with Mr. Lincoln, the founders, and then the savior of the nation. Lincoln saw an opportunity here. The moment of necessity, when you get to our next slide, involves all the fine waterways in this state. The Illinois River is a mighty river. The Sangamon River is a little bit less so. And his flatboat got stuck on the mill dam at New Salem, this tiny village. He's the one there standing on the left foreground holding a great awl in his hand, puzzling, how are we going to get this boat over the mill dam and on our way down to New Orleans with hogs and flour and other farm goods to sell at market. He drilled a hole in the bottom of it. This is completely converse to what you would expect to do in a river, but it flooded it enough. They pushed the other things to the other side. The weight of the water and the goods tipped it over the edge. They plugged up the hole and continued on their way. Lincoln patented an invention, U.S. patent number 6469, 18 years later, based on this episode, more or less. He is our only president to hold a scientific patent. Moment of necessity. Isn't Illinois full of creative geniuses like that who have benefited all of us? Our next slide, of course, takes him into the more professional life of the mind. This is a dark scene because it's a dark frontier cabin serving as a courtroom. And yes, farmers have disputes over animals. Lincoln literally did argue a case in which two farmers were fighting over possession of a pig. There's the pig, there's Mr. Lincoln on the left. his solution was to let the little pig go and see which farmer it ran to. You could say that's an early sign of letting the people decide. Let the animal, the contested one, decide. Our next slide. By the way, both of those paintings were by an Illinois artist named Fletcher Ransom. You can still, if you're entrepreneurial, find some of his artworks for sale now and then. He was quite talented. 1930s and 40s was the peak of his career. We have the 1857 photograph of Lincoln in Chicago, known as the Wild Republican Hare photograph. That's what the Easterners think of this part of the country, and they may still, for all we know. But how is it he got to the point of needing a photograph taken in Chicago? It's because here in Peoria, 3 years earlier, 1854, as we heard at the outset of this program today, the longest speech he ever gave, as far as we know, about 3 hours, October 16, 1854, it contains such brilliant assertions as this. The spread of slavery I cannot but hate. I hate it because of the monstrous injustice of slavery itself. I hate it because it deprives our Republican example of its just influence in the world. It enables the enemies of free institutions with plausibility to taunt us as hypocrites, and causes the real friends of freedom to doubt our sincerity. Make the statement that you are sincere about. Any who doubted that Lincoln hated slavery as president, that he emancipated the slaves, 3 million of them legally, on the 1st of January 1863, let him or her go back to the 1854 speech in Peoria, when he was not in office and had no power to change things. The spread of slavery I cannot but hate. Always did. And as we take Lincoln at his word, and we are these days, as we've heard from our other speakers today, circumspect about criticizing anyone else in their sincere beliefs, except on the grounds of the strictest moral and political logic. This is how we learn the art of civility in democracy. And all 4 of our presidents today, I think, have taught us aspects of that lesson. There is one other speech, and this is amusing in its way. The lost speech of 1856 in Bloomington, the first state Republican convention, set the land afire with Lincoln's anger about slavery, and thus it was never published. But 100 years later, a science fiction time travel book called The Lincoln Hunters by a Bloomington native named Wilson Tucker takes people from living 700 years into the future back through their time machine to Bloomington to try to capture Lincoln's words at that event. I'm not going to tell you how it comes out in case you read the book yourself. But that's even in the field of science fiction. People are trying to recapture Lincoln's leadership on this topic. So we get to the Wild Republican Hare, this place in the West where some people are irate, screaming mad about slavery in the free American West. And this gets updated. I want to show you here to the next slide, in a land where we have beer and distilling going on. This is the can from the Rolling Meadows Brewery near Springfield, where that very photo has been updated for Abe's Ale. Entrepreneurs make use of our man. I think you would have approved. It is Lincoln's presidency and his courage and his resolve that have led so many who came after him to want to associate themselves with Lincoln. Other than George Washington, I think, is there any such person in this country for whom we can say that? Everyone wants to be associated with Lincoln. And it works for some, it works less well for others. My next slide simply shows a very good, famous, recent example, reaching across the political aisle when Mr. Obama was inaugurated on a great day in 2009, happens to have been the bicentennial year of our 16th president. There they are pictured together, a historic moment. And I think you all appreciate why that came to be and why it was right that it came to be. So my last slide simply shows that we're not on a brand new topic here today, John. As excellent as your exhibit is, as excellent as Illinois' state bicentennial is, this is a book from the year 2013, written for middle schoolers and high schoolers, introducing us to the warm phenomenon of our 4 Illinois presidents. So here in Illinois, I guess you can say we are pretty well sold on Mr. Lincoln. Let me conclude instead by giving a small sense of his international importance. A foreign source commenting right upon the moment, the day that Lincoln's death was learned in London, England. The London Star, a paper for working men and working women, ran this headline on the day they learned of Lincoln's death. Mr. Lincoln, the finest character developed by the war. It is war, unfortunately, as we heard from Ian, that sometimes brings out the greatness in some people, as we heard with Ulysses Grant. It was the ending of a Cold War, in the case of Ronald Reagan, that gave us perhaps his most memorable speech. It was President Obama's efforts to end our long and difficult involvement in other wars, which to some extent he did, and yet in other ways he was unable to do as we continue to fight in these international scenes that the greatness of this country has led us to take responsibility in. It is our 4 Illinois presidents who have had more to do, I think, than any other state's presidents in making this country internationally necessary and internationally good. So I thank you for your attention. I'll simply add, as Alan Lowe, the director at our museum, who was here a week ago, John said, asked me to remind you that our show on the 4 Illinois presidents begins on March 23rd and will run all through our bicentennial year. So after you've seen the much larger and wonderful show here, please come down to Springfield and get a little different view of our 4 presidents. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you put a plug in because I was going to. Please, how many people have visited the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library? Almost everybody in the room. Isn't it wonderful? Ray LaHood, I will mention, was an integral part of pushing for that library. And I was there on the day it was dedicated by President Bush and Senator Obama. Remember that day? You and you, the 3 of you, and there was another guy there who used to be governor, but I won't mention. But it was a great day. It was a great day. We have in Illinois great assets to be able to tell our stories. Objects tell stories. Stories inspire people. And I think today we've heard some glimpses of stories from our 4 panelists, and now I want you to throw in your questions, your comments, your thoughts about the Illinois presidents. Who will go first? Dr. Sean Matheson.
So Illinois has arguably a claim to 3 of the top 10 presidents, and President Grant is moving up in the rankings as he probably should. Is there anything about Illinois itself that you think contributed to their excellence in office?
So to repeat the question, if you did not hear it, Dr. Matheson asks, Illinois has a claim to arguably 3 pioneering, revolutionary presidents ranked high, if not 4, as Grant moves up, and so forth. What's in the water here? Secretary LaHood, you want to give a stab at that?
You have my microphone. Let me just throw it back on you, Sean. You must think there is something in the air or something in the water.
We're doing pretty good as states, maybe not as governors, but we're turning out good presidents. Is it a mix of urban, north, agricultural, something that makes us moderate, something that makes us pragmatic? I don't know. I'm curious. You certainly are the experts.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's very, very hard to get elected president. It's a hard job, and when you think about the fact that Lincoln was not born in Illinois, President Obama was not born in Illinois, President Reagan obviously was, President Grant obviously was not. I don't know if we can say it's something in the water. I do think the influence of Chicago, the influence of being a community organizer, the influence of serving in the state senate, all of these obviously played a big part in President Obama's ascension and opportunity. You look at the influence of Eureka College, of growing up in Dixon and what it had on President Reagan, and then, obviously, President Lincoln was one of us in a sense from Central Illinois, and I think that could be said of Reagan, having been at Eureka for the 4 years that he was here, and certainly President Obama representing Illinois. The answer to your question is I don't know, but the opportunities that Illinois created for their political opportunities, I think, is something to be noted.
And I think too, to add to that, there is something about a strong Midwestern influence, possibly a strong Illinois influence in particular, but also to add to that whole notion of opportunity and American opportunity. Also, there's something about humility that I think you see that cuts across. That's a common thread of sorts. So that humility and the appreciation for the opportunities that they were able to receive, whether it was through education or having that sense of community. And I think even, Reagan loved the fact that he grew up in a small town, and then, because of the community, he loved the fact that, Eureka College, which was again an extension of that, being a small community. And you're talking about very humble people. And I think taking that humility and that appreciation for opportunity in this great country is what helps them to be such great leaders in being the president of the United States. So I think that's a common thread.
I would say something that is related to this. It's quite extraordinary when you think about the history of our congressional leadership. Scott Lucas from Havana, Illinois, became majority leader. You think of that title today and that position today, majority leader today sets the agenda for the entire United States Senate. And Everett Dirksen, having been a congressman, developed an eye disease, left the House of Representatives, then went on to run against Scott Lucas, Everett Dirksen from Pekin, Illinois. That will never happen in the history of Illinois again, where you have two men, one from Pekin and one from Havana, rising to positions of leadership in the United States Senate. I think it's very difficult to conceive that someone from Pekin or Havana could be elected to the United States Senate from Illinois, given the sort of the state of our politics today. So I think that sort of plays into it too, in a sense that, and then I think of a man that all of you know, and that's Bob Michael, coming again from very humble beginnings and becoming the longest serving Republican leader in the House of Representatives.
I would say, I think Dr. Matheson alluded to an important point there when you said, are we north or south? Illinois is the longest north-south state east of the Mississippi, possibly excepting Florida. And it's that central Illinois merging of the southern and the northern cultures, which in the days of Abraham Lincoln made him understand people from all over the country, north and south, not just on the slavery issue, but in terms of what kind of agriculture they practiced and what sorts of uses they made of the rivers and machinery. And then you have to say that whether it's God's providence or Mother Nature that made this land so rich in agriculture and in transportation, we go from being the great waterways state to the great railroad state, and now we've got O'Hare Airport and a couple of others that are pretty good too. This is a fulcrum, this state.
It's an honor to share a mic with you. Did it roll down?
Yeah. Oh, it is.
Oh, there it is. Next question. Yes.
I do agree with Mr. LaHood on that too. That the Midwest has a certain thought process that is ingrained in us as Midwesterners, where we start from humble beginnings. I think that's what makes us more robust when we go on. That we go on and try to take on things, but with humility.
Midwestern humility, Midwestern values. Anybody agree with that as a comment? Yeah, so the statement was about the sort of commonality of the Midwestern, the influence of the Midwestern values, either coming up from them or being influenced by them here. So, question up there. Yes. Russ Crawford.
As a former history instructor, I am delighted that you're all four here. It's obvious that your knowledge goes well beyond your assigned president today. So here's my question. What do each of you feel is the greatest similarity and the greatest difference between these four great Illinois leaders?
Greatest similarities and greatest difference. Greatest similarity, greatest difference between these four Illinois leaders. Let's start with Dr. Cornelius and come down.
I'm lucky because we talk about this sort of thing all day in my office. I don't know about your office. The greatest similarity is that all four of them were really good athletes in different ways. Now, I don't know if that's true of all presidents. I don't think it's true of all. Certainly there some are and some are not. The greatest dissimilarity, level of education. I mean, access to education. Abraham Lincoln, less than 12 months total, his whole life. Barack Obama, editor of the Harvard Law Review. You've got a world of difference in there, and yet they come to the same point because they are excellent with people.
Ian?
They all married amazing women. They all had wonderful families, wonderful foundations that really helped them excel, not just in their private lives, but also in their political lives. All four of these women were remarkable, and certainly there are stories about them, but I don't think any of the four of them get to live at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue without the women that they had in their lives. Dissimilarities, well, certainly while Mr. Reagan and Mr. Obama and Mr. Lincoln oversaw wars, oversaw conflict, Mr. Grant lived it very, every part of his life. During the Mexican War, during the Civil War itself, he was actually in the trenches. So I know that's a reach, but he saw conflict from a very different perspective than the other three.
President Wright?
So I guess I would, in terms of similarities, that one's a little easier. I think of the chairman of our board at Eureka College. His name is Bill King. And he talks about these 4 things that any leader must have. And I would say that this is a similarity, and all 4 of them had these must-haves. One is the ability to listen. The next is the ability to take a risk, the ability to learn, and final, and probably most importantly, is the ability to care. And that's to literally care for the people in which you are governing, leading, interacting with on a daily basis. So whether it was the folks you were in the trenches with in the military, or, Lincoln saving the dog, or, Reagan, who famously and all the time wanted to go out and actually talk to people and engage with people, and people wouldn't be able to find him sometimes, or he'd always be running late because he wanted to actually interact with and engage in people, or Obama and his community organizing and actually wanting to be boots on the ground. So I would say they share in that in terms of similarity. So in terms of dissimilarity, that one I'm giving you more time, Secretary Lilly, before we go. In terms of dissimilarity, interestingly, I would actually point to, despite the fact that there were, you had war and those kinds of things, I think there are some actual interesting dissimilarities in terms of some of the circumstances that existed at the time for each of them that made their leadership and the fact that they are such, especially 3 of the 4, such popular presidents, even more amazing. So when you look at some of the nuanced differences of those times and what was happening, you always have social issues, you always have issues with the economy, but I think some of the challenges that they faced in dealing with them made their experiences dissimilar, and yet they, again, 3 of the 4 at least, were extremely popular, and some of the didn't have as much scandal possibly as the 3 of the 4, as much as Grant may have over their presidencies.
I wouldn't add a thing, John. I think they probably covered it really.
Ray said he wouldn't add a thing. Yes, question.
First of all, quickly, thank you for this museum. Thank you for this event. And 2 little tiny things, for those of you who have to give speeches a lot. 2 tiny things. I was once in Puerto Rico for a long time in a car, and the driver knew more about Lincoln and this state, I was embarrassed to realize, that I did. And that's an interesting thing to say about that poor little place today, so I wanted to say it. And secondly, I was recently in Ireland, and that's a country known, at least mythologically, at least for its communication and stories. And I was astounded when I got to a big oasis, food court, gasoline, on one of the highways. Some of you may know this. It was the Barack Obama oasis. They didn't call it that. It was all about Barack Obama. I was stunned. They had big pictures of him and his family. International, I'm connecting that. Okay, here's my question. I really have one. The common thread that I hear is this one about communication. The great communicator, the memoir,
The Great Writer,
and all the speeches that everybody knows about Lincoln. But I have heard different things about Barack Obama. And I'm not putting you only on the stand here, Ray, but you probably saw him communicate in more ways than the rest of us. And you other 3 at least could maybe comment about his public communication. Where do you believe he stands there?
The question is about the communication abilities of President Obama.
Yeah, look, I think he's will go down in history as probably better than anybody else, mainly because I think he, number one, is very smart. He's very cerebral, he's very intellectual, and he knows the facts, he knows the information, and probably as important as anything, he knows his audience. The way that he would give a speech in some ways would depend on the audience he was giving the speech to, and the message that he wanted to deliver. And I went to every one of his State of the Union addresses that while I was secretary, which meant I went to 5, and his address before Congress was different than perhaps his address before the NAACP or before a group of transportation workers. And I think the reason that people were caught up with and supported then Senator Obama was because they thought that he really had the ability to tell a story, to tell it like people wanted to hear it. And you know, when he had his problems with Reverend Wright and he gave the speech in Philadelphia, how many of us could have really been able to deliver that? And he wrote that speech himself. So I think his intelligence and I think his understanding of the audience and I think his understanding, his being a very smart person allowed him to really deliver a good message. And it's a talent. There's no question about it. It's a real talent. And it carried him in good stead for 8 years, and obviously all through his campaign. I think the other thing, when he would go to visit the families who lost loved ones in a shooting, whether it would be Sandy Hook or wherever, that was a different President Obama than delivered a speech somewhere else. I mean, again, knowing his audience and knowing the message they wanted to hear and being able to really make people feel like they were the most important people he was talking to at that moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the statement. Well,
how about this young person up here, John?
yes, let's get you, and I want to say something about you all in the top row in just a second. So go ahead, what's your question?
Well, actually, I have a comment. So, when you guys were talking about Ronald Reagan and Ulysses S. Grant, for Reagan, you said that he was very opposed to communism. Well, when he was a movie actor, and this happened a lot in the society of, actors and stuff like that, he was actually thinking about turning communist because of the environment that surrounded him in that period in his life. And with Ulysses S. Grant, part of the reason he had lung cancer was because he smoked a lot, and that's what happened then as well. And he was also in a lot of books I've read, I read that he was an alcoholic as well in a point in his life.
Yeah. The statement, and what grade are you in?
Fifth.
In the 5th grade. Where do you go to school?
St. Philomena.
At St. Philomena. Well, thank you very much for the statement. Was about Ronald Reagan's period of acting and his interfacing with what was that anti-communist movement as well as communism growing in Hollywood. I think that was a question. And also about Ulysses S. Grant's smoking. Response, maybe Grant first on the smoking and then Reagan on the communism.
The smoking is kind of a funny story. Smoking is not funny at all, but unfortunately, one of the early photos taken of Mr. Grant when he started to succeed as a military commander during the Civil War, he had a cigar in his hand. And following the victories at Fort Henry and Donelson, suddenly admirers from across the country decided the best thing that they could do was send him a box of cigars to let him know what a great man he was. So Grant is literally receiving wagons full of boxes of cigars, and he's taking them up, he's smoking them. They didn't know at that time what we know today about the effects of smoking and cancer, certainly. It was something that everyone did. Most of the beautiful homes of that era had smoking rooms that the gentleman would retire to. It was very much a part of their culture. As far as the alcoholism, I think the alcoholism has always been greatly overblown. He did have issues with drink while he was on the Western frontier, but I will tell you, when you are assigned to a military installation in Oregon, and you are literally hundreds of miles from civilization, you play cards, you drink, you fight. Those are about the only things they did at those forts. Grant had 2 children that he had never seen. I take that back. He had 1 child that he had never seen at all. He had 1 child that he had only seen as an infant. He greatly missed his family, and he wanted to come home. I will close real fast. There's a wonderful story I always like to remind people. During the Second World War, General Dwight Eisenhower was talking about the greatest American military commanders, and of course he mentioned Grant, and one of his subordinates said, "Well, General, you don't want to talk about Grant because Grant was drunk, and we don't want to bring this up." And Eisenhower said that no one who planned the war effort the way that Ulysses Grant did during the last 3 years of the conflict could have been intoxicated while also pressuring the Confederacy. And there was no one better than Eisenhower to understand that, because of course Eisenhower had gone through all of the planning for World War II. So I always think that the drinking was always greatly overblown as it applies to Mr. Grant. But yes, he did have a few drinks, certainly.
And Reagan, the point of Reagan, Reagan's beliefs actually evolved quite a bit over time. As a matter of fact, while he was at Eureka College, he was a Democrat. And so his beliefs changed, which is very important for all the young people to know that over time, as you learn more things, as you read more, as you become more well-rounded, your perspectives on life undoubtedly will change on a number of topics and a number of issues. And Reagan was exactly that type of person. His father was a huge fan of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? I mean, so he grew up in a different time, went through the Great Depression and all of those things while he was at Eureka College that happened. And so you're right, and given his careers, you can also see how some of his perspective started to change as he was the Screen Actors over the Screen Actors Guild and all of those things. And so yes, over time, his perspectives absolutely changed, and ultimately being vehemently opposed to communism.
Thank you for those intelligent statements and questions. So very, very proud. Well, listen, in the interest of time, we'll have one more question, and we do have a little reception following, and our panelists have agreed to shake hands, answer questions further. So let's make this the final question. We'll wrap it up, and then we've got coffee and cupcakes waiting. How about that? Presidential cupcakes. No less. Go ahead, please.
Quick question. Did I understand correctly that Grant really never had any political experience before he got elected?
Yeah, the question is, was it true that Grant never had political experience prior to?
Basically. I will say that when Andrew Johnson was battling with Lincoln's Secretary of War Stanton, who he had inherited, of course, that there was a short period, less than 6 months, in which Johnson sacked Stanton and temporarily appointed Ulysses Grant as Secretary of War. He did almost nothing in an official capacity. He was still trying to wrap up the war effort. He was drawing down the United States military, which was going from over 2 million soldiers down to 100,000. He held no elective office, though, prior to that. I mean, other than 6 months as a temporary Secretary of War, no, he never once was an elected politician before rising to the White House.
Okay, final thoughts, starting with Lincoln, all the way up through Obama. Dr. Cornelius.
I encourage everyone to learn more about Abraham Lincoln, whether you're Irish, or Puerto Rican, or American. I will just allude to one point that John made me realize. Those who ask me, who do you think was the greatest American president? It must be Lincoln. I said, I'm afraid not. I think George Washington is the person without whom this country could not have got started. And most people around him said so. We can't know whether someone like Lincoln could have handled secession and the Civil War better or worse. We can't know, but there were other people around. So read about Lincoln and share that with people all over the world.
Thank you. Ian Hunt.
I would just say that while Mr. Grant has always been kind of mired in the middle as far as presidential popularity, the recent biography on him by Ron Chernow, which is a phenomenal book. If you get the opportunity to look at it, I would highly recommend it. I think that is really pushing Grant up the scale as far as people remembering what he did and what he brought for this country. I don't think he will ever break into the top 10, but he was truly a good man who did a lot of great things for our country that tend to get overlooked.
President Jamel Wright.
Yes, I would just throw out another opportunity for you all to visit Eureka College, and Mike Murtaugh sitting over there, my vice president for advancement, or even if we borrow John Morris for the day, or we'd love to have you all see the museum. And also there's a big part of history there. We have a piece of the Berlin Wall in our Peace Garden. And not only that, but as you think about, there are a lot of books I know that the Riverfront Museum has written about Reagan. I just saw them right by the gift shop there. I would highly encourage, if you visit campus too, and if you're with Mike Murtaugh especially, you'll have an opportunity to see the Mark Shankman Library that we have on campus, where you can actually see, we have every book ever written about Ronald Reagan there. So if you want to learn more about his history and some of the wonderful and amazing influence that he had over the course of time, and especially as president, then the Mark Shankman Library is a good place to visit as much time as you have to check out some of those books that have been written about Ronald Reagan. So, and I want to thank you again for allowing me to participate with these wonderful gentlemen to my left and right. Thank you.
Honored to have you, Secretary Ray LaHood.
Let me make 3 quick points. When John and his team decide to put something like this on, they have no idea how many people will show up. So to each one of you, thank you for coming out. Thank you for your interest in our country and interest in our leaders and interest in the leadership of our country. That's number one. Number two, for me to have the privilege to serve in a president's cabinet is an extraordinary opportunity. And I go to Bradley University on a pretty regular basis and talk to the students. And the 2 things I tell them is, no one in my high school class, I graduated from Spalding in 1963, would have ever predicted that Ray LaHood was going to be a congressman or Secretary of Transportation. I graduated from Bradley in 1971, and if you do the math, you know I was in the slow learner program there. No one would have ever predicted that Ray LaHood would have ever been Congressman or Secretary of Transportation in the 1971 class at Bradley. And I say that because this is what our community offers. And to you young people, thank you for being here. There are so many opportunities because we do live in a great community, as exhibited by the people who showed up here today with an interest in our country. Number 3, during the 4.5 years I served in the cabinet, President Obama was an avid golfer, as am I, and he would invite me to play golf with him. I played golf with him on a number of occasions. So last summer, I was in Washington. I emailed one of his staff people. This is by way of, for those of you who are wondering what President Obama is doing. So I email his staff and say, I'm around this weekend, meaning I'm in Washington, if the president is going to play golf. And they emailed me back and said, well, he's not going to play, but he'd like you to come by his office. He now has an office in Washington, D.C. So I went by last June, spent 90 minutes with President Obama, and we just sat and talked for 90 minutes. And he's concentrating on 2 things. He's writing a book. So I say to him, how do you do that? And he said, I write it out longhand on a yellow pad, and then I turn it over to people who type it. And the second thing he's doing is raising money for his library. The Obama Presidential Library will be on the south side of Chicago, in the neighborhood where he grew up, right near the University of Chicago, on the lakeshore. It'll be a magnificent facility, and I think capture very well his political career and certainly his 8 years. So those are the 2 things that ex-presidents do. Raise money for their library. He has to raise $500 million and write books. Thank you, John, for organizing this, and to your entire team here.
Thank you.
Well, to wrap things up, I want to do one last thing. and that is on behalf of all of us at the Peoria Riverfront Museum. Let me ask you this: do you like this topic of the American presidency? I'm going to say one last thing, and then our Vice President for Programs, Renee Carey, and I have a special gift for Dr. Cornelius and Ian Hunt and President Wright and Secretary LaHood. And that is that there have been 4 presidents connected to the state of Illinois. But I want to ask these young people sitting here in the back row, if you please stand up. Just stand up. There's 4 or 5 of you right there. Okay, first of all, let's hear it for them for coming out for a presidential forum on Sunday. And
all St. Phil's.
Are you all St. Phil's or? Give us your name and where you go to school. We know we don't know your name. Give us your name and we know you're St. Phil's.
Bethany Simpson.
Bethany Simpson from St. Phil's, yes.
Maria Gadamer, and I'm homeschooled.
In your homeschool? Excellent. Yeah.
Blake Simpson, I go to St. Phil's.
Blake Simpson, St. Phil's, yes.
I'm Mark Gadamer, and I'm homeschooled.
Mark Gadamer, homeschooled, yes.
Catherine Gadamer, and I'm homeschooled.
All right, Catherine Gadamer. Well, listen, there have been 4 presidents connected to Illinois. Perhaps someday there'll be a 5th, and maybe they're in that row right there. Thank you. Thank you for coming. On behalf of all of us, we appreciate your support for the Peoria Riverfront Museum. We have a simple mission: inspire people. Please join us for presidential cupcakes. We thank our panelists, and Renee Carey has a special gift for each of you. God bless. Thanks for coming. We'll see you out in the lobby. These are bicentennial monks.